Welcome to the Bard's Corner. Here I like to tell some amazing stories, so sit back and enjoy this tale. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get into it. You know how to make the pain stop. The voice hidden behind the darkness of my second floor apartment bedroom said. My last stint at rehab had only kept him at bay for a day or two. Every single time I careened off the side of the wagon, he was there to catch me. He was far from my salvation, though. You know it will make you feel so much better, he chuckled, which seemed to cause my bedroom to vibrate ever so slightly. I pulled the pillow over my head in an attempt to shut the sound out. Unfortunately, the reverberation of his words were not bouncing off any walls, with the exception of my inner defenses that were always so weak against him. Just a taste, he whispered directly into my ear, as though the flattened pillow I pressed against it wasn't even there. One drink is all it takes. He laughed softer than before, but that only made the depth of his words cut so much deeper into my brain. No! I cried out into the empty room, while I pounded my fist against the soft mattress. Only the laughter echoed in response, seemingly emitting from the very oxygen I breathed. I threw the blanket off me as it was barely comforting my trembling goose flesh anyway. I pulled myself out of my bed and reached a shaky hand to the light switch next to the door. I wrapped my arms around my midsection in a feeble attempt to ease the tremors in the pit of my stomach. Every step demanded all of my effort as I made my way across the living room towards the kitchen. There you go, the voice sneered. I could almost hear the wide grin reach across his face as I began my staring contest with the half-drained bottle of Jameson that sat beside the sink. I had attempted rehab a total of 3 times in the past. Maybe it was my own self-hatred that led me to endure the painful process of detox over and over. Perhaps I was just to convince myself that I was becoming my father. It was his voice that haunted my subconscious, though it wasn't quite him, if that makes any sense. It's both darker and at the same time friendlier than his was. It was also far more legible, as his voice in life was slurred and hard to understand most of the time. It almost made it easier to ignore his constant badgering and insults when I could barely make out where one word led into another. His punches were far easier to understand, though I'm sure they didn't always land where he intended. "You just gonna keep staring at it, or what?" he growled into my ear. I know I should have gotten rid of that damn bottle when I decided to forego the hospital stay this time and plow through the cold turkey on my own. I think I wanted to prove I could do it, you know? Rehab would keep me clean for a while, but it never lasted. It would take less time for me to go crashing off the side of the poorly constructed wagon each time. I think I chose to keep the green bottle of liquid temptation around to prove that I could resist its allure. I was feeling pretty confident at first. That was until the voice manifested some days ago. It was always within those first few days of sobriety he would appear. "You're the same pansy you always were," the voice growled. I could vividly picture the snarled lip my father would get when he jeered at me through the gritted teeth. "No," I repeated far softer than before. I wasn't sure if I genuinely couldn't muster the energy required to bellow out my denial, or if I just knew it would be ignored regardless of whether I shouted or whispered. I felt my arm reach for the bottle, though it did not feel like it was of my own volition. "What are you doing?" I belted out to the limb that appeared to be acting independently. I grabbed at my wrist with my other hand, the only one I still felt I had control over. No matter how hard I pulled at my right arm, it still pushed towards the empty bottle on the counter. "No!" I yelled out into the night once more, as I released my grip to swat my left hand at the bottle. The glass shattered when it made contact with the microwave that was mounted above the stove. The transparent door cracked as glass met glass, and the whiskey splashed back towards me from the impact. One single droplet met my lower lip, and I heard the voice crawling its way forward from the recesses of my brain. "More!" it shouted out, causing a thin stream of blood to leak out of both of my ears and drip from my nose. I fell to my knees, barely feeling the fine slivers of the shattered whiskey bottle digging into the flesh of both kneecaps. I smelled the aroma of the spilled drink as it blended with the blood that now oozed from my legs. "More!" the voice echoed through my thoughts, far softer, but filled with far more intent than it previously demanded. I fell backwards onto the cold tile floor of my kitchen, and slid my body away from the pool of temptation that now blended brown with scarlet. My right arm still reached out in desperation as the demented ghost of my father screamed from within. while my back slammed into the wall behind me. I wiped my mouth with the back of the only arm that still obeyed my will, in a pale attempt to smear away the lingering taste of a single drop had given me. Flavor threatened to send me flailing down a road I no longer wished to traverse. The addiction had taken everything away from me, with the lone exception of the memory of the very man I despised the most. "Lick it up," the voice murmured. It seemed more erratic all of a sudden. "It's not wasted yet," it bargained, as my right arm made a desperate attempt to drag my body towards the wide pool of liquid and glass. "Now!" it screamed out in an anguished pain. "No," I said through trembling words. "You can't make me," I continued, shaking my head violently from side to side. "Not any more." I kept pushing my body against the wall that pressed against my back. I continued sliding my feet across the solid tiles to ensure that the lone appendage he was manipulating would not force me forwards. It was long before I found my own affliction that he passed away. I won't pretend that I didn't feel a certain amount of relief and joy when I heard the news that Daddy wouldn't be coming home anymore. It was well known what a worthless piece of shit drunk he was, so my mother wouldn't face any sort of prison time when she lost her ability to handle his abuse anymore. There were plenty of witnesses on the night he waged his final assault on the only woman who had ever even attempted to stand by his side. Nobody would argue that he didn't have it coming. "More!" the voice screamed out again as my right hand clawed at the floor, causing a fingernail on two of my fingers to tear from the flesh against where the small, square tiles meet. I screamed out against the pain, both physical and mental. I grabbed at my right wrist again, but the arm I could not control proved far stronger than the weakened one that still belonged to me. I dug my fingernails into the back of the hand that still waged its war to drag me towards the puddle. My actions only served to bring me more agony while the voice cackled madly behind my eyes. "You're only hurting yourself," it said in a satisfied growl. "You're only hurting myself," I weakly retorted, feeling my eyes well up and my conviction fading. "Let me make the pain go away," it sneered. "Let Daddy make it all better." He chuckled condescendingly from within the confines of my skull. It was at that moment that I had the wild idea to pound my own head against the wall I had been pressing my back on. I extended my neck out as far as it would go, without allowing my right arm to nudge me forwards, and I slammed the back of my head against the wall. "What the hell are you doing?" the voice belted out as I beat the back of my skull against the splitting drywall again. I was already feeling dazed and dizzy, but I just kept pounding and pounding while the sheetrock flaked fine powder onto my shoulder. "Stop it!" he cried out in desperation as the lights finally faded away before my eyes. It was a little after my 19th birthday when the disembodied voice of my father first began to call out from the darker recesses of my mind. I had sworn to never repeat his mistakes, but I had no idea, at that time, that it was anything more than my own thoughts that convinced me to take that initial sip. It's not like I had not been in the vicinity of alcohol in the years that followed his death. My mom still had the occasional drink to soothe her heavy heart, but I never had the urge to indulge until she had made her own departure from this world. My college career started off quite well. I received a full ride due to the advances I had made in high school. Life was proving quite promising for me in the years before my mother died. It was cancer that brought her life to a close, as it has to countless others over the years. Her passing left my sister and I both stunned and broken. I still mourn for her to this day. I should not have attended that off-campus party only months after I lost her, but I sought distractions from my weary thoughts. At the time, I didn't recognize the voice that assured me that one drink wouldn't do me any harm. I only assumed it was no more than my own subconscious that recommended a little assistance in helping my broken heart to heal. It wouldn't be until many years went by after I lost my scholarship and washed out of college that I began to realize who truly whispered from the back room in my brain. I lost friends and loved ones through my inebriated and selfish actions, though I still never allowed myself to cause physical pain to anyone other than myself. That's one aspect of his that I am grateful I never inherited. I may be a deadbeat like the man who assisted me in my conception, but I'm not him. Not entirely. My head was pounding when I awoke from the unconscious state I had forced myself into. The room spun, and it took me a few moments to register where I was and what I was doing. "No!" I cried out again while my right hand fed the brown and red liquid into my mouth. I coughed and spit blood across the stolen fingers as the sharpened fragments of broken bottle dug into the inner wall of my throat. "Stop!" I screamed while I battled to prevent the hand from reaching my mouth again, having no idea how much I had been forced to ingest before I came back to my senses. My father laughed and yelled out in victory as he sloshed my hand into the bloody pool of whiskey and glass. "Can't stop me now," he sneered and continued to chuckle. I punched at my right hand with my left, but his will seemed so much stronger than mine. I felt the fingers on my dominant hand wrap around the thumb of my left, before it was forced backwards with an almost deafening snap. I screamed out in horrific agony as the bone separated from the knuckle, while the echoing voice of my father spilled victorious curses at me while he reached back to the puddle on the kitchen floor. I couldn't tell if my spinning head was caused by the gaping wound on the back of my skull, the shock of my broken thumb, or the onset of intoxication. As my right hand raised back towards my mouth with a fresh scoop of whiskey and blood and glass, I darted my eyes around me in search of some manner of escape. I finally settled my gaze on the base of a shattered bottle that lay only a foot or two away from me. I extended my leg to cut my foot around the lower half of the discarded container and dragged it across the floor towards me. While my outstretched leg guided my weapon of choice, I bit down while I pressed my hand to the floor in an attempt to bend my thumb back into a usable setting. I screamed out when the bone snapped back into a manageable state, and I grabbed the fragmented bottle base. While my father cupped my right hand around my mouth, I allowed the liquid to pour in as I jammed the jagged cylinder of glass between the bones that connected the fingers. My dad and I yelled out in unison as my metacarpals separated and snapped. "No!" he belted out against the stolen limb losing partial functionality. I slammed my right hand to the ground and flipped the broken bottle around so that the thick base was now pointing downwards. I dug my knee into my right forearm to restrict its movement, and I wrapped the fingers of my left hand around the sharpened circle of glass. "Don't!" my father screamed out, bringing me a wild and manic smile, while I allowed the jubilation of my dad being on the defensive to overcome the intense and brutal pain that pulsed through me now. I slammed the thickened base of the broken bottle onto the back of my right hand. I felt the glass cut into the fingers of my left, while shattering the bones of my right. I raised it high and brought it down again, and again. Over and over, I beat down on my own outstretched hand. Blood streamed from where I held the glass and burst from where shards of bone began to protrude through the flesh. I screamed out louder and louder with every attack against myself, while the deranged voice of my old man yelled out in protest. I'm not sure entirely when I passed out, nor whether it was from shock or exhaustion. I found myself strapped down to the hospital bed with both hands wrapped up and a certain degree of numbness. It turned out that one of my neighbors from my apartment building had called the police about a possible domestic disturbance. I must have been down for the count by the time they arrived, and I can't help but assume they found themselves perplexed by what they saw after knocking my door off its hinges. Given the degree of my apparent self-harm, I was committed to a mental institution for a time. I would go through many months of therapy, both physical and psychological. It's safe to say that my shrink didn't quite buy into my recollection of how that night's events had played out, but I think he has helped me quite a lot. Over the years that followed, I patched things up with my sister, and even managed to convince a few of my old friends that I had changed my ways. There were a few who would not buy into my claims of being a new man, but I can't blame them. Some burnt bridges can never be repaired, I suppose. My right hand has never quite been the same. It turned out that I broke just about every single bone, but several surgeries and a buttload of physical therapy later, and I'm up to about 70% mobility. My left sports a lot of scars and a thumb that makes a clicking noise whenever I move it, but it works just fine, overall. I'm coming up on my 6th year of sobriety. I won't say it's been an easy ride, but I'm proud of the progress I've made. My sister and I are closer than ever, and I've been attending some community college classes to finally attain my engineering degree. I still hear the voice of my father from time to time. It's not as loud as it once was, but he still lingers in the darkest recesses of my mind. My shrink argues that it's just my own damaged psyche that calls out in the night, but I've even seen the image of my old man just staring at me through the darkness at times. Maybe he will always be there as a reminder of what I was. It could be that he's just waiting, just hanging in there for the possibility of a single moment, just the smallest fragment of time to sneak back through my walls. I only hope that I have the strength to fight him off a second time. Thanks for listening to the Bard's Corner. If you have any first-hand encounters with cryptids or aliens, feel free to send me an email with your encounter, email down in the description. Also, leave a comment and tell me how you found